Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, and today I'm joined with Andy Behrens of Yahoo and Hutchinson Brown, who's the newest staffer over at Footballguys. We recorded the show on Wednesday, so a lot might have changed by the time we recorded and it hits the YouTube channel on Friday. But what we're going to look at are some of the early transactions that have happened so far in free agency and the ramifications that those are going to have in fantasy football. Now that James Conner has returned to Arizona, is he going to be an RB1? Is DJ Chark going to stop a breakout from Amon-Ra St. Brown in his second year? And can Mitchell Trubisky support all of the talented offensive weapons that Pittsburgh currently has? You're about to find out, so tune in. The Jaguars made some huge splashy moves in day one of free agency. Do you consider these moves to be, as a whole, a win or a loss? Andy Behrens, go ahead and start us off. How are we feeling about the Jags?
The short answer, I think, is that the moves are a small win. They reminded me a great deal of what New England did with a lot of its money last year, acquiring a bunch of players who, if we're being honest, probably got more money than their body of work had shown that they deserved. But they are still good additions around a young franchise quarterback, right? I think it's also important to note that the coaching change is the biggest deal in Jacksonville and will remain the biggest deal because they were a disaster from a purely game planning, strategic, team culture perspective last season, and it's not going to be that way this year. Like, no matter what else goes wrong in Jacksonville, they have grown up coaching, which is a huge deal. I thought one of the biggest problems for that team last year, and it became a recurring theme each week when I would watch Jags games, it is, I can't tell you how often two receivers converged on the same spot last year. Like route combos,
it really was frustrating.
Were unbelievable. So yes, the short answer is yes. It's a free agency is a win. The coaching change is a huge win.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Ian Hartitz, but somebody took a clip from a game where it was literally four receivers, two guys in the slot, two guys out wide, and they ran four slants directly into each other. And I mean,
all the time.
I remember this clip. Oh my God, it looked so embarrassing. It was so.
Yeah, well, I'll have to find that. That was a good one. But I think you hit the nail on the head here, Andy. It's kind of because it's the Jags that people are making fun of all these moves, right? Like the Patriots did this last year, and funny enough, the biggest contract that the Patriots gave out, Jonnu Smith, ended up being the bust. And then you got Kendrick Bourne, who was getting a couple $1 million. He ended up stepping up huge and completely surpassing his contract. And that might happen here. Like Christian Kirk might not do that well, but maybe Evan Ingram steps up. Maybe Zay Jones has a big season. They're doing the right thing by surrounding Trevor Lawrence with talent. Hutch, what do you have to add to this? How are you feeling about the Jaguars' moves?
I really like it. I really, really like it. I think they got to win here. They got to win, but it did cost a lot. I mean, they spent a lot of money on some players that maybe not deserve it. I mean, I tweeted out, like, the winner of free agency is Christian Kirk's agent. Like, the fact that they were able to get him $84 million is pretty crazy. But I think Jacksonville is showing Trevor Lawrence that they want to surround him with pieces to help him win. I mean, getting him some offensive linemen, getting him some extra wide receiver help. They're showing him that, hey, we want you to be our guy. We want you to be our quarterback. Let's get you these pieces to win. And I feel like that gives a note of confidence for Trevor Lawrence in his team and in himself. I think
you're also seeing the cost of doing business in the NFL when a franchise is just sort of flatlined, right? Like I'm sure there wasn't another team that was in a bidding war for Christian Kirk that got up to 4 years and 80 million, right? Like they're kind of bidding against themselves, but your franchise just doesn't have a lot of credibility right now. So this is a strategic overspend.
Yeah, and I also I kind of cracked a joke talking with Jeff Bell about this yesterday. But how many receivers do you think had deals that were almost done and then got the Christian Kirk news and said, you know what? No, if Christian Kirk's getting 484, who knows? Maybe Allen Robinson had some sort of deal penciled in with the Lions, 4 years, 60 million or something, and then he saw the Christian Kirk deal and said, maybe I'll hold off a little bit. But it's one of those things where, like you said, they may have to overspend a little bit, but they're doing the right thing by getting Trevor Lawrence some reliable pieces that he'll have for the next few years. So I don't hate it. I think that they're getting a lot of a lot of crap just because they're the Jaguars, and that's really what it comes down to. But
you were Captain Jaguar on Twitter as soon as they made these signings. You were the person that defended them with the strongest, fullest, purest voice.
I did. And, funny enough, these ended up being like all of my guys. And I don't know what that says about me, but, Zay Jones is somebody that I'd been hyping up. I've been a Zay Jones fan since his Buffalo days. Evan Ingram, I feel like he's had a tough shake in in New York, but we saw what he could do as a rookie. He had one of the best rookie tight ends or rookie seasons that a tight end has ever had. Christian Kirk is a guy that I think is completely just utilized wrong in Arizona. So a lot of these guys were guys that I was really excited about in free agency. And then when they all got signed with the Jags, it was a little tongue in cheek. Anyone that knows me knows that those are my guys, but I do like what they did. And I think they're getting way too much scrutiny. Whether it works or not, we'll find out soon, but they're trying. And that's what you want to do when you have a quarterback like Trevor Lawrence on a rookie deal. So I can't fault them for that. But want to thank everybody for tuning in. This is now episode 29 of the Launchpad, and you can find this on Footballguys exclusively. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, youtube.com/Footballguys. Last week, I was with Evan Silva and Dalton Cates. We talked about sports betting, talked a little bit about some free agency predictions, but now here we are halfway through the first week of free agency, and we have some actual ramifications to cover. I am joined with Andy Behrens from Yahoo and Hutchinson Brown from Footballguys. Andy, go ahead and start us off. Not only are you at Yahoo, but you co-host the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast podcast over there. Let us know what you're working on this offseason, where we can find you on social media and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, we're actually continuing twice a week podcasting on football on Yahoo, so that's fun. That's going to be available to you throughout the spring and summer. Obviously, fantasy baseball just came back into being, right? Because we have a season now. So we're producing a ton of fantasy baseball content over there, and I just hosted our Tourney Bracket Now show on. I'm having one of those weeks where you have to cover like 3 or 4 different sports. Yeah, we got the tournament going on, we got baseball going on, we got football going on. I'm swimming in free agent news like all of you.
Yeah, and I love that about you, Andy. Everyone kind of specializes in one sport, maybe dabbles in another, and you do it all. NCAA, MLB, NFL, absolutely love to see it. Just staying busy year round. He sure is. And then we've got Hutchinson Brown, which might be a new face for a lot of people that are tuning into this show or tuning in on Footballguys. But Hutchinson is the newest staffer over at Footballguys. This is going to be your first look at him, but he's going to be doing short videos on our YouTube page as well. So really excited for him to start getting some content out there. He is also the host of the Young Fantasy Mind Football podcast. Hutchinson, let everyone know where they can find you on social media and just welcome yourself to the Footballguys audience.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Very excited to start making content for Footballguys. You all can go follow me on Twitter at TYFMNFL. It stands for the Young Fantasy Mind NFL, so that helps you memorize it. But you can always hit me up on Twitter. I'm always around. If you got any fantasy football questions, just DM me. I'm always happy to help you guys out with fantasy football questions. And the Young Fantasy Mind Football podcast episodes go every Tuesday. And this past Tuesday, it just had the 100th episode. So super, super cool about that.
Congratulations.
And also, I did want to throw it in. I didn't mention it to Dave before we started, but I do also write articles for DLF, Dynasty League Football. So if you have a subscription to DLF, go check those out.
Hutch, what are you going to do when you age out of your Twitter handle? I mean, you're going to be 30 before you know it. You won't be able to call yourself the Young Fantasy Mind anymore.
Yeah, well, it's 15 years away. I don't know. That's a long time from now. I have no idea. But
a few years away from the quarter life crisis Fantasy Mind. I mean, you're almost there.
Yeah, I'll have to figure that out. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, definitely check out Hutchinson if you aren't already. This kid is a budding star in the industry. So much fun on Twitter. Does a great job of engaging with his followers, putting out some fun content. So follow him if you haven't already.
Dave, thank you.
But let's go ahead and jump right in. I feel like before we get into talking about this, I should mention that it is Wednesday afternoon. We are recording a little bit before the show is going to come out on Friday afternoon. So we're going to try to stay away from speculation because so much can change between now and Friday. So we're going to talk about the news that has already happened and what we kind of expect the ramifications to be from this news. And let's start off with running backs. And Chase Edmonds was shipped to Miami. James Conner was brought back on a 2-year deal to stay in Arizona. So we kind of got a two-parter here in Hutchinson. I'll start off with you. One is Chase Edmonds going to be worth anything in Miami? And how high is James Conner's ceiling in Arizona? Go ahead and start us off, Hutch.
Chase Edmonds to Miami. I honestly think people are going to be just throwing him away. Honestly, this offense has a very negative vibe to it from a lot of fantasy people because of mainly Tua Tagovailoa. A lot of people like to underrate him, but I love Mike McDaniel. I love this new offense, and I think that the Dolphins have seen what Myles Gaskin can do over the past few years, and obviously they're disappointed. They signed Chase Edmonds to a 2-year deal. I feel like they're going to use him. Chase Edmonds is a great pass catcher, which is very important for running backs. So I actually see, as long as the Dolphins invest something in their offensive line, maybe through the draft, maybe a little bit through free agency as well, I think that Chase Edmonds could absolutely sneak into the top 24 running back. So he'll be someone I'm looking for at ADP. And then, Dave, we've talked about this on Twitter. I love James Conner right now. James Conner is I haven't posted my official rankings, but my rankings will be kind of after the draft. And right now I have James Conner. I'm working him out right now. He's at RB11 for me. He's right inside the top 12. He's right there. And just because of those injury prone days in Pittsburgh, he's going to be drafted outside the top 15, and he's going to be someone you're going to want to look for in drafts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, when Chase Edmonds was healthy, he was really propping up his fantasy value with an insane touchdown rate. And then Chase Edmonds got hurt and he became a pass catching machine while still keeping the touchdowns up. So, I mean, James Conner killed it last year. But Andy, I want to get your take on this a little bit, and then we can talk a little bit more about Chase Edmonds, because I think that's an intriguing one.
It is.
I think that first of all, Chase Edmonds does all the Myles Gaskin stuff better than Myles Gaskin did, right?
Exactly.
A super capable receiver. I have to imagine that it probably doesn't change the fact that Miami is gonna roll out some sort of rushing committee. I don't think that anybody views Chase Edmonds as like a 300 touch guy or even a 270 touch guy or anything like that. So I think there are going to be other names that we have to worry about here. He's also probably going to fall in that RB dead zone where it's always, it's just a minefield in terms of the draft. So I doubt I'll end up with a lot of him. He's a good player. Can he catch 50 balls if they actually decide to throw to the running back? And can he? I don't think he's going to have some huge red zone role. So that's going to be a problem for Edmonds.
Yeah.
But
but who would it be though in the red zone?
Right, that guy might not be on the roster right now.
Right?
That guy probably isn't on the roster right now. That is an unanswered question. Conner, I think, is tricky because obviously 18 touchdowns last year sort of propped him up a little bit, right? Not an efficient runner, never been an efficient runner. Barely over 3.5 yards per carry last year. Not that that's a stat that you need to be super focused on. And people are I feel like there's going to be a certain segment that screams regression with him, right? Because his fantasy value was so tied to the touchdowns last year. But we always have to ask, regression to what? And James Conner could easily still score 9-10 touchdowns. That makes him really valuable. So he's going to be, I feel like I'm going to rank him reluctantly because I don't think that highly of him as a player, but we could very well look at this backfield and say, okay, he's clearly plan A. And if he actually stays healthy, he's clearly getting 280 touches, and he's obviously going to, he's going to be in line. It's a good offense. He's going to be in line.
He's a reliable pass catching guy. He's a reliable pass catching guy too.
Mm-hmm.
He showed that down the stretch. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think both, obviously Conner is the guy that we're valuing a little bit higher over here. Kind of the way that I'm looking at this Miami depth chart right now, I'm not planning any flags until I see how it, shakes out after the draft once free agency is over.
Yeah.
And what I'm going to be doing is just drafting the fastest guy on that team, because if Mike McDaniel's going to go in there and implement whatever they're doing in San Francisco that's worked so well, that's what they want to get, is the guy that can get outside as quickly as possible, find that lane in the zone, and just take off. And Chase Edmonds does a lot of things well, but he's not exceptionally fast. So I think, he's got history with the 49ers and with the Dolphins, and he's a speed demon. I think Matt Breida is going to end up on this team at some point, and that's the guy that I'll be throwing a late round dart throw at, but still a lot to see with Miami.
If you were to end up the Dolphins, I agree with you. I'd be taking shots as well, because it's just so interesting with Miami backfield right now, because there's no James Conner on the team. There's no guy that's going to take strictly rush points. It's two pass catching specialists on this team, smaller backs that are great at pass catching, both kind of elusive. It's good. They're just so similar. So it's just going to be very interesting to see who gets the carries if they don't really bring anyone back.
Yeah, and we might not know until week 1. It might be one of those situations where we'll be guessing all off season. But anyway, the next story I want to talk about, sticking with running backs, J.D. McKissic is on the Buffalo Bills. Psych. He pulled the rug out from under him after committing yesterday, and he is going back to Washington. I mean, I don't know if you listen closely, you can just hear Antonio Gibson truthers screaming all over the country. But Andy, help us out here with J.D. McKissic back in Washington. How much does this cap Antonio Gibson's upside?
Yeah, I think it was Chris Towers actually who made the most important point on Twitter, which was like, if JD McKissic is the factor that causes you to swing wildly in terms of your valuation of Antonio Gibson, then maybe you were never really in on Antonio Gibson in the first place, right? I like Gibson, and I give him a ton of credit for what he played through last year. Like, I think he missed the one game with COVID, right? Never missed a game while playing on a broken leg.
Unreal.
That's amazing. Like, too often, if there's one thing that I feel like I've noticed year after year in fantasy, and I've obviously covered this longer than Hutch has been alive. That's crazy. It's the fact that fantasy managers tend to give players zero credit when they play through stuff. This was the case with Odell Beckham a couple of years ago. This was the case with Antonio Gibson last year. Like, I can't tell you how often people in my Twitter mentions were telling me that Antonio Gibson is just not a special talent. He's not this, he's not that. He's playing on a broken leg. And he's showing up every week for you. So, like, I think we're going to get a much better version of Antonio Gibson in the season ahead. I'm not like, almost every team in the league runs some sort of committee. So I don't think we should be concerned that there's a known quantity that's also in the backfield attached to anybody. Like, that shouldn't bother you. And if JD McKissic returning to Washington is your biggest concern, I don't know, you're probably out on Gibson. I still think he's a super solid second round pick who's going to be better than he was last year.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the splits right now. I mean, obviously Antonio Gibson played better with McKissic, but the splits aren't nearly as dramatic as you'd think. 14 points per game with McKissic, 17 points per game without him, so an extra 3 points. And then his targets went up a little bit, but his targets jumped from 3 per game with McKissic to 4.6. So it's not a dramatic change in usage here. And like you said, I mean, if JD McKissic is the deciding factor for whether you're all in on Antonio Gibson or not, you're probably not all in. But Hutch, what do you have to add to this? How are you feeling about Antonio Gibson now that McKissic is returning?
I mean, yeah, I'm kind of with you guys. It doesn't affect him too much for me. He'll probably be like right around RB15 for me, right around that range, like a higher end RB2, solid second round pick. But I do have some extra information to add because Adam Schefter did add some information here. So, quote from Adam Schefter on his Twitter account, background on the change of heart. Washington initially did not offer J.D. McKissic a deal until he agreed to one in Buffalo, according to his agents. Once McKissic heard Washington was willing to match the offer Buffalo gave him, he didn't want to leave Washington. So I think Washington was kind of just like, okay, kind of like cheaping him out, saying like, all right, we'll give you this little bit, or we're not going to give you money at all, really. And J.D. McKissic was like, nah, I'll just leave and go to a different team. And then Washington saw him leaving. They were like, no, we need to get you back. And they were like, okay, get him back. So it is interesting to see that go, though, because like, I feel like if they saw him going, didn't want him to leave, and then brought him back, that's a pretty bad sign for Antonio Gibson, right? Like, they want him on the team. They want McKissic on the team pretty badly. So it is interesting to see that, but I'm not too fazed by this at all. But it is going to be, McKissic is definitely going to be involved here. And Gibson, I don't see him being a workhorse this year.
I feel like there's a flip side here in that but Buffalo is clearly looking for a steady receiving option out of the backfield, right? And that is, and I'm hesitant to call this any sort of win for Devin Singletary. I think Singletary is going to be good next year, and there's obviously still plenty of time. So, I mean, I think Buffalo they've sort of signaled already what they view as a team need. I think they're going to find a complementary back for Singletary, someone other than Zach Moss, and someone who is a super reliable pass catcher, and then that's going to ding Singletary a little bit.
And we might not see that now. We might not see that move until the draft, and that's what everybody keeps looking at these like we're 2 days into free agency, 3 days into free agency, and everyone's acting like this is the final roster that we're looking at week one. There's still a lot of offseason left.
There's still tons to go. Yeah.
But let's stick on the topics of running backs. There's a couple more I want to talk about. And for me, one that was really kind of under the radar was Tevin Coleman re-signing with the Jets. Now, I'm not saying that you should go out and get Tevin Coleman by any means, but I think what this move shows is that there's going to be a commitment to Michael Carter next year. They could have gone out. There were some big name, Leonard Fournette, and we already talked about James Conner, Deonta Foreman. There were some big name free agents out there. But I think that them bringing Tevin Coleman back shows that they are pretty committed to Michael Carter. Hutch, what do you think? Am I getting a little bit too presumptive here, or can we, put Michael Carter down for a sizable workload next year?
I think we can put Carter down for a good workload next year. I really, really do. I mean, with Zach Wilson struggling in his first year, I don't expect him to take a ginormous leap into the elite quarterback category next year. I expect him to at least struggle a bit, which means maybe they want to depend on their running back, especially in the passing game, like short, like nice, comfortable short passes. And that's where Michael Carter will thrive. And I mean, this offense improved down the stretch. Zach Wilson did as well. And I think Michael Carter is going to get a sizable workload. The biggest question to me is his health. He is a smaller back, and we saw the injury problems last season. And that's gonna be a big turnoff for me, is the injury problem. But
his size is one thing, and the other is that you can put him down for 300 touches, but being on the Jets, those 300 touches might only turn out 2 to 4 touchdowns. I mean, it's the Jets we're talking about. Might. But Andy, how are you feeling? If I remember correctly, you're kind of on the Michael Carter train, right? You're a Michael Carter guy.
Well, I think you're dead on correct in that if they just run it back with what they had, it's a really good sign for Michael Carter, because by the end of the season, he was at 60% of the snaps, 70% of the snaps, right? Like, he was seeing the field a ton. We saw him play very well in the screen game for that team. So I think more than anything, I think it's a ringing endorsement, right? It would have been a big problem if they brought in a bigger brand name back to serve as some sort of complement or lead runner or anything like that. I think this is a pretty solid endorsement of what they already had on the roster.
Yeah, agree with that. Well, there's only one more running back to talk about. There are still so many as of Wednesday afternoon. There are still a lot of big name free agents out there that we're, still waiting to see where they sign. But one guy that we got was Deonta Foreman, who I have been picking up everywhere. I was a big fan of this guy when he got drafted. Injuries really kept him from ever really fully breaking out. And then last year, he stepped into the Derrick Henry role. And while nobody can fill his shoes, Foreman did a decent job. It was kind of a mixture of him, Hilliard, and McNichols, but Foreman looked good in his own right. Now here he is in Carolina, and I don't really know what to make of this. And there's a lot of different ways that you can look at it. I've seen some rumors where they're saying, hey, Christian McCaffrey is going to be playing slot receiver now. Some people are saying that Christian McCaffrey is getting traded as a part of a deal for Watson. I mean, there is so much speculation here. Personally, I think that it's just a good depth add. He's a good running back, and Christian McCaffrey gets hurt. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. But Andy, what are you making of this signing with Foreman in Carolina?
I think it says more about Chuba Hubbard, who wasn't great last year. Exactly. It's unless I have the terms wrong, this is just 1 year and $2 million. So
right.
if this had been 2 years, $8 million, if this had been the McKissic deal, 2 years, $10 million, something like that, then I might have really raised an eyebrow and started to think about the serious possibility of a McCaffrey trade, something like that. This is a very low level commitment. I think it's fine money to spend. I'm not totally with you on Foreman. I think it took him a month to force a missed tackle last year once he actually took on a significant role in Tennessee. I didn't think he had any elusiveness at all, and it wasn't until he really had significant run that we saw him begin to make a few plays. It doesn't mean that he wasn't still he gained a bunch of yards, right? But there were a number of runs early where it was 30 yards downfield before anybody touched him, and he was almost always tackled by the first guy that got in the frame with him. So I don't think very highly of him. This is not a particularly strong endorsement of him. This is, again, 1 year, $2 million is not like you're our running back of the future sort of thing. I think this speaks more to the fact that they know they need a backup for McCaffrey, and a reliable backup, and they don't think they have one on the roster.
And I think last year, the problem is they had two guys that were great pass catchers that could fill that role when McCaffrey was out. But McCaffrey, despite his size, is also a power back that can get it done between the tackles and at the goal line. So I think now, rather than it being, all Amir Abdullah, all Chuba Hubbard, I think if McCaffrey is to miss time, we'll see a committee now.
He is obviously stylistically, he's not at all like Derrick Henry, but he is of the caliber of running back who, when you have to replace him, you have to replace him with three guys, which is exactly what Henry was.
Yeah. Great point. Do you have anything to add to this one, Hutch, or do you want to move on to receivers?
No, I kind of I'm liking what all of you guys said. I mean, I'm not thinking McCaffrey's going to be traded. I think this is just the Panthers not being happy with what Chuba Hubbard did. And Andy, remember when you came on my show this past year, and we talked about over-unders. We were talking about like some over-under for some fantasy point props, and we bet on
when I got every one of them right.
Yeah, every one of them right.
We're talking
and about. The one, and I got 2 right, but the one I missed on, it was Chuba Hubbard, and it was like over/under 12.5 fantasy points, and I said he's gonna score. I believe he gets in the end zone, barely hits 12 points. And he did get in the end zone that week, but he scored like 9 PPR fantasy points because he did nothing outside. yeah. Chuba Hubbard, I'm also done with him just because of that. So yeah, I think Foreman's really just a backup here to replace McCaffrey if he's going. I think they're just done with Chuba.
Yep, couldn't agree more. But hey, it's fun to speculate about. Christian McCaffrey playing punt returner and quarterback and doing whatever else everyone thinks that this Foreman move means. But let's talk about wide receivers. What was that?
I still think there's a realistic chance that they trade for Watson though. I think a lot of the coaching, a lot of the managers are kind of done with the quarterback, like the last few years of terrible quarterback play. Like they want a real quarterback. I feel like Deshaun Watson's out there and he might be that guy.
Yeah, they've been one of those front runners for a year now, pretty much. I mean, it always seems like they're in the conversation. So we'll see what happens there. But Hutchinson, start us off. I want to talk a little bit about DJ Chark here. Do you think that his presence has a positive, negative, or neutral impact on everybody's favorite breakout receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown, heading into next year? What do you think?
I see it definitely as a bit of a negative, but I'm not pressing the panic button on Amon-Ra St. Brown, honestly. And in terms of like how I'm approaching him in Dynasty, honestly, it's a positive. I used to want to sell him for like a first-round pick, but at this point, if you can go to a panicked manager and get him for like a mid, maybe even low second, which I've seen done, I would absolutely be doing that right now. I mean, the Detroit Lions, if they did not trust Amon-Ra St. Brown to be their number 1 receiver, they would have brought in an Allen Robinson. They would have brought in Amari Cooper. They would have brought in one of these other big name free agent wide receivers, but they didn't. They decided to wait out and bring in DJ Chark to complement Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I am fully believing right now in Amon-Ra St. Brown that the Lions want him to be the number 1. They believe in him as the number 1, and their moves have shown it.
Andy, what do you got on this? How do you think Chark affects Amon-Ra St. Brown, if at all?
I thought St. Brown was fantastic at the end of the season, and it's one of those situations where like the genie is just out of the bottle, and you can't I don't think the Lions are going to go back on this. And for however long Jared Goff remains the Lions quarterback, this is the area of the field where he works, right? If we think of DJ Chark as more. Yeah, if we think of Chark as more of a downfield guy, and he's got 4.3 speed, and back in 2019, which now feels like forever ago, like he was great for 3/4 of a season. But Jared Goff never goes downfield. Like and this is we're on his second team where he's not throwing deep passes, right? So this is part of his DNA. This isn't like a team philosophy thing. This is a Jared Goff, philosophy thing. So I just don't expect Chark to be that much of a factor, and there's no way that they veer away from St. Brown. He was great.
Yep. And they only only signed Chark to a 1-year deal.
Yeah,
it's not much commitment to him, especially in Dynasty, which I was looking at there. Like he might not even be on the team. I feel like this is more of a prove it deal than anything.
Yeah. And I wrote an article just about a week and a half ago saying, try to sell Amon-Ra St. Brown. Not only do I think that I predicted that they'd sign a free agent, but I also think that they're going to use, they got 3 draft picks this year inside the top 34 in a very wide receiver heavy class. So I think that they probably still draft a receiver as well. But as far as the available guys that were out there, Amari Cooper on a trade, Juju Smith-Schuster, Christian Kirk, those are the guys that I think would have really hurt Amon-Ra St. Brown's value. I think DJ Chark is the best case scenario because they play such opposite roles for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Allen Robinson would have hurt him big time too because those are guys that like running short routes. They're possession receivers. They play a lot out of the slot. DJ Chark is going to take all of his snaps out wide, and he's going to be stretching the field, which, if anything, just gives Amon-Ra St. Brown more room to work. So right now, as it is, I do like the situation. My big fear is that they're going to use one of those top 34 picks on a receiver, and that could end up, dinking his value just a bit. But let's stay on wide receivers because a lot moved. We opened up the show talking about the Jaguars a little bit, but obviously the big deal there was Christian Kirk. Hutchinson, Christian Kirk's got to be the wide receiver 1, right? Do you expect anybody else on this team to step up, or is Christian Kirk going to be the guy commanding the targets, getting all the touchdowns next year?
Dave, like you, I do like Zay Jones a lot. And I was a person last year who did like Laviska Shenault. but I feel like Christian Kirk's going to be the clear number one receiver on this team. I just don't see many worlds where he's not. And then Trevor Lawrence, the fact that he was struggling a bit, that means, most struggling quarterbacks like to lean on an option more than anything else. And I feel like Christian Kirk's going to be that guy for Trevor Lawrence this year. So I would bet on Christian Kirk being the clear number one, and the other guys, I just don't know. I'll take a couple shots in drafts if their price is good enough, but I'm not confident.
Yeah, and it seems like the common take now is that Laviska Shenault is just a bust, that he's bad at football. I think that he was kind of utilized here to Jacksonville. I'm not ready to completely throw in the towel on him yet. I think maybe a change of scenery, maybe some new weapons there. Maybe it's a bit foolish hoping for that year 3 breakout after 2 years of mediocrity. But what do you think about this situation, Andy? Do you think that it's going to be the Christian Kirk show in Jacksonville?
Yeah, first of all, with regard to Shenault, I think it would be really interesting to see how a different coaching staff would use him. He strikes me as the sort of, I am not comparing him to Deebo Samuel, but with the sort of usage that we saw from Deebo last year, the sort of usage that the Lions gave St. Brown late last year, where they would put him in the backfield, like he's built for that. He could do a little bit of that, but it's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen in Jacksonville, not after this spending spree. I think Hutch makes a good point about the tendencies of a very young quarterback who's sort of trying to get his feet under him in the league, just like zeroing in and having radar lock on a single guy. And I think Christian Kirk is the most likely candidate for that. I can't say that there's been a point in Christian Kirk's career where I thought, wow, what could this guy do with 160 targets? He's never been that guy for me. But I think he might get 130. He might get 120, 130 this season. And if that happens, it's going to be really difficult for him to avoid 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards. I think he's the clear number one. He said they've certainly paid him as the clear number one. Ingram is probably going to be a thing. Not that I'm going to
look for him. I was really liking Dan Arnold for a moment there, and then Evan Ingram just kind of that ruins him. So I'll be looking for Ingram as well. I didn't mention him, but he's interesting.
Yeah. I think Ingram is going to be a factor. He's obviously, like, the more you watch Evan Ingram, the more you sort of dislike him, at least lately, right? Like he was kind of a comedy last year, but again, his first season was full of promise. So, and it's not at all uncommon for us to see tight ends on their second team really begin to thrive and take off. So that wouldn't be much of a surprise at all. But I think Christian Kirk is probably looking at 130, 135 targets in a healthy season, and it's really hard to screw that up.
Yeah, and we know that Doug Peterson loves his 12 personnel. I mean, you look back at his days in the Eagles, whether it was Trey Burton, Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz, I mean, he was always running 2 tight end sets out there. So now with Dan Arnold and Evan Ingram, I don't want to say that they're as talented as Ertz and Goddard. That's just foolish. But I think that is kind of in Peterson's DNA, is to get 2 tight ends out there that like to catch passes. So I love the Ingram call out. He, it feels like we're getting duped once again into believing that tight ends are going to be deep this year. But I mean, there's like 25 guys that look like they could be realistic weekly starters right now in the NFL at the tight end position.
The tight end position sucks.
It does. But this year, and that's what I should say, it's not deep. You've got your clear-cut top 5, but then like 6 through 25 all have pretty similar upside. And I think that's where Evan Ingram kind of gets grouped in. But let's stick with the wide receivers, and I want to talk about Russell Gage, who really had a breakout campaign. If you look at his 2021 season, he got off to a pretty slow start, but he finished red hot, took over easily as the wide receiver 1 in Atlanta, and now he gets a quarterback upgrade from Matt Ryan to Tom Brady. And we know Chris Godwin probably isn't going to be ready for week 1 with that late season ACL tear. So, Andy, start us off here. Is Gage a guy that you're going to be actively looking at to possibly draft as the wide receiver 2 in Tampa?
There are almost no quarterbacks who can support 3 startable, rosterable fantasy receivers. He happened to land with a team that has one of those few guys, right? Like there's it's a hand. I don't know. Is it 5 guys? Is it 3 guys in the entire league that can support 3 startable fantasy receivers? Not many.
Honestly, he was supporting AB, Evans, and Gronk too.
And Gronk.
And Fournette.
But luckily, we've landed in that situation, right, with a 5,000-yard passer, with somebody who's seen everything that you can throw at him. So yes, I guess is the short answer. I think it's a great landing spot for Gage. He was never going to land as somebody's number 1 receiver. No matter what kind of junk they acquired in Atlanta, Gage was not going to be the number 1. That was never a possibility for him. So in terms of landing with a team where he could actually see 90 targets, in an offense that averages 28 points a week. That's about the most that we could possibly have hoped from Gage, and he's there. So yeah, that's a guy who, if I can find him in the back half of drafts, I will absolutely get him.
And shockingly, Russell Gage is still just 25. I don't know why. He seems like this grizzled veteran that's been around for a lot. Hey, he's still just 25 years old. So I mean, I'm excited to see what he can do in Tampa.
That feels like DJ Moore a little bit. He's been in the league for a while, and he's only like 24.
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while there's those ages that really surprise you. Like Allen Robinson, I feel like he's been in the league for 12 years, and he's still, he's another one that just is always younger than you think he is. But let's talk about the Cowboys a little bit, because not only did they ship Amari Cooper off to Cleveland, but they gave Michael Gallup the big deal. And there was some speculation that Michael Gallup was going to get paid to be a team's wide receiver one. You know, they were rumored Chicago, Detroit. There were a lot of teams that were desperate for a wide receiver one that fan bases were calling for Michael Gallup. But now he gets to go back to Dallas, which is a high-powered pass-first offense, and he is the locked and loaded wide receiver two over there. So this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but in a vacuum, Andy, start us off here. Amari Cooper or Michael Gallup, who are you going to prefer in 2022?
Well, again, just to sort of set the table we're talking about this. We're talking about this on a Wednesday during free agency, right? And I have no idea what the Browns are going to look like next year. I just know that Amari Cooper
or by Friday.
Yeah. So are they? But right now, the way I think of the Browns is they're a team that wants to throw the ball 25 times a game, run it 35 times a game. And so, no, I'm not going to be like all in on Amari Cooper. They didn't give anybody more than like 5 looks a game last season. So that's, it's not death to Amari Cooper's fantasy value, but it ain't good. I'm going to be way in on CeeDee Lamb and on Michael Gallup. I think Michael Gallup is a really good pro, and he's just a couple seasons removed from 1,100 yards and looking fantastic. Great downfield threat, and I think he can do a little bit more than that. I really like him. If he's healthy coming into the season, I'm going to be all over him.
Yeah, and I know it sounds crazy. That's why I said it, comparing a team's wide receiver 2 to a team's wide receiver 1. But Dallas is going to throw the ball a lot. And that there's going to be a pretty good share between CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup. And like you said, Amari Cooper, I don't know if you can project him for more than 5 targets a game in Cleveland. So, huge ding to Amari Cooper's value, huge boost to Michael Gallup. But right now, as is Hutch, let's imagine that Baker Mayfield is still the quarterback for the Browns. Who do you think you'd prefer, Amari Cooper or Michael Gallup next season?
Man, I mean, right now I have Amari Cooper ahead of my rankings, but now that you bring it up, if I was going to draft one of these guys, I mean, one of the biggest things I learned from 2022 is if you're looking between 2 players, you can't really decide who is the better quarterback, who is the better offense. And it's easily Michael Gallup at this point. Like, it's not even close. And, I feel like this defense last year is going to have a bit of a regression year. I mean, they just scored so many times. Like, the Cowboys were the leading team in scoring, but a lot of that was their defense. Like Trevon Diggs with pick sixes. Like, there were so many pick six, so many fumble recoveries that ended up being touchdowns for this team. That's going to have to regress at least a little bit and go back more towards the offense. I feel like the Cowboys are going to have to pass a little bit more. And an underrated move, like, they got rid of Cedric Wilson, who was very involved down the stretch. He's in Miami now. So it's Schultz, Gallup, and CD. Gallup is somebody that I'm going to be looking at a lot in leagues, and I think he'll be significantly cheaper than Amari Cooper. But in a vacuum, I feel like it's really, really close for now, but I think I might side Gallup because of the offense.
Yeah.
I really might. It's so like, I feel terrible, but offense for Gallup is just there.
I want to add here that Schultz is a huge winner here as well, and great rapport between him and Prescott. Winner. Like, is he going to be the tight end 5, 4? I don't know. He's going to be up there. He's certainly going to be like whatever he's that second tier.
Top 6 drafted tight end, because I think Hutchinson will go ahead of him, and then the top 5 guys. So he's going to be a value. I'm going to be really surprised. I'm an Iowa guy. Love TJ Hawkinson. I'm going to be really surprised if TJ Hawkinson goes ahead of him. I mean, I think that next tier of tight ends, I think Schultz is going to be at the top of it.
Yeah, and I think you kind of know now, after a few years with TJ Hawkinson in the league, you kind of know what you're getting. You're getting a really safe floor, and you're not getting a huge ceiling. So I think TJ Hawkinson, now, at least from what I've seen in best ball, last year I think we got a little bit carried away with him going in the 4th and 5th round. But I think right now, where he's getting drafted in the 7th and 8th, he's a pretty good value there. And you're not going to get that Kelsey type upside from him, but he's going to get 7 targets almost every single week. He's going to get 40, 50 yards almost every single week, and he's a safe guy that you can reliably start.
Maybe now with Amon-Ra, man.
Yeah,
who knows? Now breakout, and now a Chark there.
And don't forget DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift was commanding 6.5 targets per game. Yeah,
like it's a whole new offense now. It's not like just Hutchinson, nobody else. Like they brought in Swift, Amon-Ra, and DJ Chark. Like this is a whole new offense with a lot of different good pieces.
I think what you can confidently say is that between Amon-Ra St. Brown, DJ Chark, TJ Hawkinson, DeAndre Swift, 2 of those guys are going to live up to their ADP, and 2 of them are going to be absolute busts. So good luck finding out who it's going to be. But let's stick with tight ends. We already talked a little bit about Evan Ingram, and I mean, we're scraping the barrel here. There wasn't a lot of tight end news. CJ Ozomah. Is that right? Ozomah, right? I always want to say Ozomah, but I think it's Ozomah.
I see Ozomah. Is it Ozomah?
CJ Ozomah on the New York Jets. I mean, is this even fantasy relevant? Is CJ just completely off your draft board now? I see you shaking your head, Hutch. What are we doing?
No. Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, he is the clearly most talented tight end on that team right now, which is interesting. And I mean, I kind of alluded to it earlier with young quarterbacks, but a young quarterback's best friend is the tight end. And we could see CJ Ozomah get used in that role. I mean, there aren't too many receivers right now on this team, at least reliable ones. So CJ Ozomah could be fantasy relevant, but I just don't see the upside. I don't think this offense is going to be a top 10 scoring offense. This is not going to be an offense where CJ Ozomah can get double-digit touchdowns. That's not really in his realm of possibility. So my ceiling for him would be like a boring back-end tight end 1 in like the tight end 10 to 12 range, which they always suck. So you don't really want when you draft a back-end tight end, like when you draft a tight end like outside the top 12, top 15, you want a guy that can give you top 5 upside, which is, you know, those hit very small. That's a very small hit rate, but you want to at least look for it, because if you're getting a top 12 tight end, you're getting a disappointment.
Yeah. And I have an evergreen tweet that I have done for the last 3 off seasons now, and you have to tweak the numbers a little bit, but it's always like tight end, you know, a back end tight end 1 and like a tight end 3 are always just like a couple touchdowns away from each other at the end of the season. That's really, really what it comes down to. Do we have to keep talking about Ozomah? Do you have anything to add here, Andy?
No, I think Hutch makes a really good point in that when we say a guy can be a top 12 fantasy tight end, that's pretty dismissive, right? That doesn't mean anything at all, because we only look for the guys who can have these huge spike weeks, and that's just not going to be him. Not in New York. Like Elijah Moore is the receiving threat that you're going to want in the Jets offense. And there's on that guy. All in. Yeah, and there's just not going to be another one.
Well, now that we have covered running backs, wide receivers, and tight end singular, because there wasn't too much to talk about there, let's get to the fun part. Quarterbacks, saving the best for last. And of course, we're going to open up by talking about Mitchell Trubisky, who is now a Pittsburgh Steeler. We are ready for the second act of Mitchell Trubisky's career. I personally couldn't be more excited. I just dropped a video on the Footballguys channel this morning, Wednesday morning, so you can check that out for my quick little 7-minute take on that one. But Andy, start us off here. Is Mitchell Trubisky the guy? Like, is he going to elevate this offense? Is it better or worse than it was with Ben Roethlisberger? Talk to me. What are we expecting from Mitch Trubisky?
I feel like there's a corner of the fantasy world that thinks that Mitch Trubisky was like secretly not bad in Chicago, and that's just not right. He can be fine for fantasy purposes. He needs to, obviously the fatal flaw, I think, and I shouldn't get a lot of disagreement with this. Like Mitch Trubisky is fine when the first read is open and everything is on schedule. And when that's not the case, he makes game-changing mistakes. Like that was the situation from the beginning of his Bears career to the end. Like you could always see the physical and athletic traits that led evaluators to think, we might have something here. You could always see it. So there's always something to like pin your hopes to. But again, if things went off schedule, off script, he'd make 4 or 5 throws a game that would result in, perhaps multiple interceptions that would just change the complexion of a game entirely. And so can Pittsburgh coach that out of it? Like I even thought, for all the criticism that Matt Nagy got, I found it difficult to evaluate Matt Nagy's play calling at a certain stretch in his coaching career, because he was clearly coaching around his quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. And then I got really mad at him last year because he didn't really craft an offense around Justin Fields, a huge mistake. Yeah. But I understand why they would often, call really boring running plays and goal-to-go situations and never go for it on 4th and goal. Or if they did, they'd run on 4th and goal, right? Like bunch of questionable play calls, and it all had to do with the fact that nobody in their right mind would trust Mitch Trubisky. I think this indicates, well, I'll tell you what it doesn't indicate. It doesn't indicate that Pittsburgh's out on this rookie class of quarterbacks, right? They didn't sign him for a lot of money. He's a pretty sketchy player. So it doesn't mean that they're out on quarterbacks moving forward in this draft class. Not at all. I think it probably indicates that they're going to lean on Najee Harris at least as a runner, and they're probably going to try to lean on their running game. I mean, if you're not in on Garoppolo, they didn't get in on any of the other quarterback options. I mean, I can't imagine a team saying, you know what, we want to run exactly what we ran last year. We want to put the ball in the air 35, 40 times, and we want Mitch to do it. I mean, that just seems wildly unreasonable.
Saying that out loud just sounds pretty ridiculous. We want to throw the ball 35, 40 times a game, and we want Mitch to do it. But you're a Chicago guy, Andy, so you know kind of how this shook out. I mean, after the 2018 season, the hope in Chicago, I mean, we thought that we had our guy. You know, he made and Trubisky did have his flaws, but he made the Pro Bowl. Nagy was coach of the year. Bears made the playoffs. And then it was like halfway through that 2019 season, we just saw everything unraveling. And it seemed like, you know, half of Chicago was saying this is all Mitch Trubisky's fault, and the other half was saying it's all Nagy's fault. And I was in the camp saying I thought Mitch Trubisky was the problem. But then looking back at last season, 2021, it was kind of tough to make a case against Nagy. And I think that's what happened is a lot of people that even weren't on the Mitch Trubisky hype train saw how bad Nagy was last year without him, and then suddenly thought, hey, maybe there is something good to Mitch Trubisky, while forgetting how terrible he was in 2019 and 2020.
Yeah, I think he's a really likable guy. Like, I almost feel bad criticizing Mitch because he's
marry your daughter guy,
according to Brandon. Yeah, he's been criticized plenty over multiple seasons. But I also don't want to try to, I don't want to try to sugarcoat it for any Steelers fan, right? Like I don't think he was secretly good. I don't think he was like under the hood good. He wasn't good. He was a bit of a game wrecker.
He's a very good athlete. He is a very good athlete.
He is.
Yeah, he is a good athlete.
I don't think he's the kind of guy who can just like, man, we need our quarterback to win a game for us. I don't think he's
he's not that guy.
Agreed. Hutch, what do you have to add to the Steelers? We got two more quarterbacks to talk about here, but let's get your take on Trubisky to the Steelers.
Yeah, I like the last thing Andy said there, where you can't really depend on him to win a game. I feel like his upside is being like a top 20 NFL quarterback. Like, he just doesn't have the upside. I don't feel like we're going to see him back in the Pro Bowl. I don't think we're going to see that Mitch anymore. But I do think that Mitch can be a solid quarterback, like a Jimmy Garoppolo type, where, if you're running the ball, keeping him comfortable, letting his receivers get open, he's going to be somebody that can absolutely, be a quarterback on the be a solid quarterback on your team. But I just don't think he should be the answer. I don't think he's someone that can lead you to a Super Bowl. I don't think he's someone that can really win you a game or throw 30 times a game. And for that reason, I just don't see Mitch Trubisky being the future of the team. I feel like next year, if the Steelers are not great, which honestly at this point I don't expect them to be very great, the 2023 quarterback class is absolutely loaded, and they will at least be in the contention for some of these names. Like, there's so many great quarterbacks coming out of that class.
The last thing I'll say on Mitch Trubisky is if he blows Mike Tomlin's streak of finishing at 500 or better every single year as a head coach, he should never be allowed to take another snap on a football field ever again. We got to keep that streak alive, because that is one of my favorites. Now let's talk about the huge trade that went through last week. And I'm not even going to try to speculate on the Seahawks, because I don't think the Seahawks are going to go into week one with Drew Lock or Geno Smith as their quarterbacks. Yeah. But I think it's safe to say that the Broncos have found their guy. I live in Colorado, and seconds after that tweet came out from Schefter, people were shooting fireworks off on my block. I mean, like, the hype here is out of control. People couldn't be happier about Russell Wilson. So obviously this is a big upswing for just about every offensive skill player in Denver. But Hutchinson, who do you think is the biggest winner in Denver?
Ooh, the biggest winner. That's interesting. I think I'd have to go with Courtland Sutton. I think Courtland Sutton is the biggest winner. He's going to be someone that I'm looking for in a lot of fantasy drafts. I mean, the Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy debate is interesting to me. But I mean, we've seen Courtland Sutton do it before. We've seen this guy be a top 20 receiver before. And I mean, I would bet on him. Russell Wilson has a great deep ball. He's one of the best deep balls in the NFL. Courtland Sutton, also a great deep threat. I feel like this is just going to be a just great duo together to watch for the next few years. Courtland Sutton, Russell Wilson, let's get it.
And I can't compare DK Metcalf to Courtland Sutton because DK is a freak of nature.
I was like, no, that's not a smart comp. I was like, no.
I mean, they both have very similar skill sets, right? Like they're both
very similar skill sets. Yeah,
good at getting downfield. Andy, I see you rolling your eyes at the comp a little bit here. Who do you think is the biggest winner?
I thought it was weird that a conversation broke out almost immediately, as if we had to pick between Jerry Jeudy and Courtland. So we don't have to pick. Like they both win.
I think I like both. I do like both. But I'd prefer Sutton.
Like I'm not going to put both of them on a fantasy roster in all likelihood, right? But we don't have to choose. They're both great options. That's a great thing about Russell Wilson, and it's the great thing about upgrading the most important position in football to from being it was a disaster last season and the year before, and now you've got one of the 5 best real life quarterbacks in the game. They both win. They're overwhelming winners. I think they can both finish as top 16, top 15 fantasy wide receivers. Huge win for him. Hutch is right. Courtland Sutton is a downfield threat with a quarterback who, for like 5 years now, has been among the best deep ball throwers in the game. Absolutely huge win. But it's a staggering upgrade. At the most important spot on the field. So everybody tied to the offense wins.
And we've seen it now for 2 straight years where Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf have both finished as boomer bust wide receiver twos. Mm-hmm. And I think my fear is that, that offense was so tunneled to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. They didn't really have any other options. When you look at Denver, they've got Tim Patrick, they've got KJ Hamler, they've got Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon might be coming back. They've got Albert. There are a lot more weapons on that team. So I don't know if Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, they might both come up short of their ADP next year just because.
I can't tell you how much I would enjoy it if Melvin Gordon came back to the Broncos. People are so all in on Javonte Williams. Oh man, if Melvin
he's already getting drafted as a top 5 guy in best ball. Like I can't believe it.
With Russell Wilson, I don't see Melvin Gordon coming back because it's a very interesting debate because it's possible, right? But with the only reason that the Broncos used Melvin Gordon in my eyes last year was to save Javonte Williams and just save him for the future, right? Just save him. Don't use him. Don't work his legs up, right? The future is now. Like, they have Russell Wilson. They traded a ton of draft capital to get him. They're going to go win a Super Bowl. They're at least going to try. I don't know if they're going to be successful, but they're going to try. And the Broncos know. I mean, watching both these guys on the field, Javonte Williams was easily the better back. Watching both on the field, Javonte Williams was the better back. And I feel like they're going to let him go. Andy, you're questioning that. I think
Javante's a really good player. Melvin had an awesome season.
He did have a good season.
He had an awesome season. PFF loved him, right? Like we can just go back and look at the grades that PFF gave these two. Like they were both really good. If I'm Melvin, I want to win a Super Bowl, right? And I'm like, if you want to throw me into a committee, fine, throw me into a committee. So I guess that's why I think he might land right back in Denver. I don't think Javante's great, and he was a missed tackle machine in college. He was a missed tackle machine in the pros. It's like running back is a position where it's not like 1995 anymore, and there just aren't teams that are looking to give their running backs 400 touches. And I would not be surprised if it's not Melvin, if it's somebody else who comes in and really irritates people.
Yeah. And I could imagine, I mean, Melvin, he seems very happy on this team. It wouldn't shock me one bit if he takes a pay cut just to stay here in Denver, because he's a good fit. And he just, like you said, he had an awesome season, arguably one of his best yet. So, it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But the last quarterback move that I want to talk about is Carson Wentz. I mean, imagine reading that headline 5 years ago. Carson Wentz traded from the Indianapolis Colts to the Washington Commanders. I mean, it's just mind-boggling here. But what are we supposed to make of this? Hutchinson, what is your quick take? Is this good for Terry McLaurin? Is it good for Antonio Gibson? I mean, how are we supposed to look at the skill players now in Washington?
I mean, it's a slight upgrade, but it's not to the point where McLaurin or Gibson will be difference makers. Like, Wentz is not going to move the needle for these guys. And it's just not. I just don't see Wentz as a huge upgrade over Taylor Heineke. I really don't. I really don't see that at all. I mean, Wentz, this is his third team now over the past few years, and like the Colts straight up told the NFL they don't want him. Like they just told the NFL, they told NFL teams they don't want him. He's a locker. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry about that. He is a locker room cancer. Like, he is just not a player you want on your team. I feel like this offense is really just going to be another disaster. I feel like it's an accident waiting to happen, and I'm just not going to be a fan of McLaurin, especially if he jumps back in the top 15 again. And Gibson, really depending on his price, because we saw Jonathan Taylor literally have the RB1 overall season with Carson Wentz as quarterback. But it just really depends on the price, but I'm not too excited about either.
Yeah, I don't think you could do the Jonathan Taylor to Antonio Gibson comparison just from a talent offensive line. But Andy, how are you feeling about Carson Wentz? Does this move the needle for anybody on that team?
Yeah, no, would be the short answer. I don't think it moves the needle for anybody on that team because I don't think at this stage there's enough of a difference between the quarterbacks that they had in Washington and Carson Wentz. The team has to think that they can fix him, I guess, that they can get us back to the version of Carson Wentz from 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I don't know that they can. He feels like he's somebody who's probably a little bit shell-shocked after the past couple seasons. Hutch makes a really good point. Like, the Colts were screaming that we don't want this guy on the roster. And then Washington was like, okay, here's 2 second-round picks. Like, that's amazing to me. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the bidding war was for Carson Wentz, if it existed at all. I'm surprised that was.
There's no bidding war. There shouldn't have been. Yeah. If there was, that's not good.
My favorite story from the Carson Wentz saga was that Frank Reich had to go apologize to the front office for vouching for Carson Wentz. I mean, it's brutal. Yeah. I don't know how that just has to shatter his confidence.
If Wentz can't be fixed with Frank Reich, who led him to his MVP streak, he can't do it with anybody. Like, there's nobody in the NFL right now that's going to fix Carson Wentz. I personally think his last year as a pure starting quarterback. Like, this is his last full year as a starter.
Yep. Well, guys, I think that's it. And who knows what news broke while we were recording this show. I'm sure there will be plenty more news by the time Friday rolls around. But want to thank you both so much for making the time today. I know this is a weird time of year where a lot of people are taking breaks, so I appreciate you coming and talking football in the middle of March. Hutchinson, before we sign off, I just want to remind everybody that you can find him over at Footballguys. You could also find him at DLF, and you can find him as the host on the Young Fantasy Mind Football Podcast. Let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter, Hutch.
Y'all can go follow me on Twitter at TYFMNFL.
And then Andy over at Yahoo and the co-host of the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast podcast. I got that right.
It's a forecast. It's a podcast. It's whatever kind of cast you need it to be.
Well, let everyone know when that airs, where they can find you on social media and all that.
Yeah, that thing is out twice a week. We usually record on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They can find me on Twitter. I'm just at Andy Behrens. I don't have a cryptic handle like Hutch does. It's just my name. That's how we used to do it back in my day. I don't know how the kids are doing it today.
Not even an underscore?
I'm not an underscore guy. I'm not a monster. I'm not a sociopath. I don't use an underscore. Are you kidding me?
I actually had to buy my handle. Dave Kluge, somebody had it. I paid $20 to get Dave Kluge. I found the Dave Kluge. He didn't speak a lick of English. We used Google Translator to go back and forth and negotiate a deal. And I bought my handle for $20. So now you can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. No more FF at the end. I am the real Dave Kluge. Anyway, this is the Launchpad. You can find this show on Footballguys YouTube page. That's youtube.com/footballguys. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. That's KLUGE. I want to thank you once again for tuning in, and I will catch you next week. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to look on the right side of your screen where you can not only subscribe to our YouTube channel, but you could also check out one of our more recent videos. Just a reminder that I will be bringing this show to you every single Friday at youtube.com/footballguys. Feel free to drop a reply down at the bottom if you've got anything you'd like to add, and smash that subscribe button so you can keep seeing this content coming at you all off season long.